Good afternoon, everybody. A very happy new year and a very warm welcome to this session number 3 of our online course under the Bodhan banner, which is on donor due diligence and grant management. So we have two parts to this particular course, and we are doing the first part, which is on donor due diligence. Uh, this is session 3, which is the final session of this part A. And we have seen as a very quick recap of the past two sessions. We had understood what due diligence actually is, and we'd seen the donor landscape and understood that due diligence by donors in terms of the kind of allocations that they are going to make all categories of donors is something which is very critical, and therefore not-for-profit organizations need to be prepared for this. Now, having said that, we had then seen so this particular part A is divided into two parts broadly. One is the organizational due diligence and the institutional areas around due diligence that donors would look at. And so we had, broken down the entire organizational due diligence into some 8 categories. Now, these 8 categories are broad buckets where which included constitution, which included statutory and regulatory. And you remember regulatory and statutory in great details, both in terms of your registrations as well as your periodic compliances, both in your constitutional laws and under various other laws that are applicable to us. We had seen about policies, procedures. We had seen the financial state of health that the financial statements talk about, which is also an institutional, area that gives a lot of credence or credibility to our due diligence vis-a-vis the donors. Then we had seen policies and procedures. We had seen, the audit as a mechanism for validating your organization in terms of due diligence. And finally, we had seen the one very soft area, which was on visibility and reputational. So I had shared with you all those areas of your institution which a donor will look at from different lenses. And we had seen in each of these areas of institutional due diligence, we are doing institutional diligence. We are not doing the programmatic due diligence for a particular proposal, but a proposal that has come in, what's the organizational due diligence that a donor would do? And that's what is the subject of our part A. Now, having understood the foundation of the organization in terms of due diligence, we need to then understand the execution of our own organization versus what is the foundation. Okay, and that makes for these two parts of part A, which one needs to clearly understand. So one is the areas that we have seen is actually the foundation of our organization, and it conforms to the, as we had seen, what is it that donors look at in due diligence. That is the validation that this foundation is in order. But the foundation per se is half the story. Whether the internal controls or the mechanism for ensuring that the foundation is protected, is that also in order? And that goes to the from the more so-called strategic, the more tactical areas that donors will look at. Now, I will do that in this session, and we will conclude that with some tips that we would like to share with you. And I will also attach some of the donor due diligence checklists, all anonymous, in terms of giving you an idea of how to look at, being ready for donor due diligence rather than, scrambling for information. Now, those checklists are something that I will share with you on mail after the session. So today's session will talk about the basis for internal controls and what are the internal controls that organizations need to demonstrate to donors in terms of their actual work. This is actual execution. Okay. And that distinction in terms of the foundation versus execution needs to be very clearly understood. Now, before I talk of internal controls, I want to just, you know, give that flavor that controls is a means to address the challenge of risk. Okay. So the risk internal control tangle is something that all organizations need to understand. As it is, risks and controls has become a very favorite topic of donors because it's a matter of their reputation, it's a matter of their funding, it's a matter of their outcomes, and they are also accountable for their actions. So it's not as though we are accountable for the money; they are accountable for this for the same pot of money on their side. Now, what is a risk? And that is, the risk control kind of an equation or a tangle, as I call it. Basically, risk is something which will cause a harm to you. It's the probability and potential impact on achievement of your objective when working in a situation of threat. Now, we work in a situation, threat is universal, but within the threat environment, what actions we take and what is the risk attached to those actions, both in terms of the likelihood that that risk will crystallize and the impact that it will have on our organization's objective, our own reputation, our own ethics, our own operations, is something that needs to be that's what is risk. Now, in risk management framework, okay, and I tell you, risk management policy has become a very, very important fashionable word in the not for profit organizations also. And therefore we recommend that people should, as we mentioned in our policies and procedures section on the institutional front, let's look at having a risk management policy. Okay, because that's a dynamic speaking policy as you are functioning. Now, the risk management fundamentals talk about two aspects which we should understand. Now, we'll go to controls. But before that, I want why controls is because you have to mitigate risk. Okay. That's the relationship between risk and controls. Okay. There is risk which we need to understand. If you go to the for profit sector in this country or anywhere for that matter, the first lesson that is taught to them is on risk. We never talk of risk. However, given the situation and the current milieu and the landscape and the statutory landscape, I think this has become a very, very important factor even for not for profits, both in terms of operations as well as in terms of existence. Now, the risk management fundamentals have two things to talk about, and these two words is something we need to understand. Risk appetite is organizational based. The amount of risk that you would want to take at the organizational level, and the risk tolerance is more specific to us, but a particular task, meaning what is it within the framework of risk appetite that I'm going to take as an additional risk for achieving the objective. Okay. And all risk management approach in terms of taking decisions revolves around risk appetite versus risk tolerance, because none of our action is in absolute terms. It's all relative to the environment in which the action has been taken. So the risk is something that will decide what kind of controls you need to have to ensure that that risk is addressed or mitigated or managed. Because we cannot work in a situation of unacceptable risk. Unacceptable risk is beyond our risk tolerance. Now, what's the common example for risk appetite and risk tolerance is, like, you have a normal speed that is possible on the highway, maybe 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and a margin of tolerance that is possible above this risk, above this 100 kmph, which is possible till the time that you're not get caught, or you don't get caught, or that is an acceptable amount of risk that you are taking. Now, that amount that is acceptable, and that will vary from decision to decision, and therefore risk tolerance is more specific to a task or an action, is the amount of risk tolerance that is considered as as the risk taking ability and within the framework of internal controls. Okay, that's what it is. However, having taken all kinds of steps to manage risk, there will still be residual risks. Okay, you cannot eliminate risk altogether. It's something that one has to understand. However, understanding the risk, identifying them, quantifying them, prioritizing them, understanding them, and addressing them through a risk management approach or a risk management mechanism, which can be part of your risk management policy, is something very, very important. That risk understanding brings the concept of internal controls. As I said, the antidote for risk is internal controls. And what is internal control? Internal control is nothing but risk management or risk reduction or risk mitigation. All words the same meaning. Okay, doesn't matter what the meaning word is. So the internal controls are rules, procedures, and mechanism. Now, these rules are once your foundation is in order. Okay, once your foundation talks a particular, gives a particular language or gives talks a particular manner, thing that it wants to. So these rules, these processes, these procedures, these protocols is what the internal controls are to manage your risk. Okay, now this will be both at every stage in our organization, whether it's planning, whether it's implementation, whether it's monitoring, achieving. So basically all through our decisions, some semblance of internal controls has to be clearly seen, and that is what internal controls we are talking of. Now internal controls will be in various areas. So we have seen governance as an institutional area in terms of what is the governance structure. But internal controls will say, is the governance structure functional as required in the constitutional document or as per law? That's the difference between the foundation and the execution that I'm actually referring to. Now, what does internal control do? It ensures compliance. Yes, because internal controls are nothing but a framework. Now, when you have a framework, you are actually ensuring that there is a certain amount of risk that you are still allowing, but you are covering a lot of risk, because if the framework was not there, you will get into an unacceptable risk kind of a situation. And therefore, this framework will help you ensure that there is least of loss when there is a probability of a risk attacking you. Okay, that's how it is. Now, internal controls, as you would see, ensures compliances because it ensures that there is a framework, there is a particular, common understanding of procedures and mechanisms. Then it ensures accountability. Now, accountability is more at the organizational level. And therefore, when we talk of internal controls, it's not individual centric. It's actually accountability or risk, or what we call joint responsibility or common responsibility for the intended objective of our organization. Fraud prevention or loss prevention, very critical in terms of donor funding. Next is improves operational efficiency, because you are able to understand how much input output, both in terms of optimizing resource utilizations. How do you streamline your business processes, because that's part of the various internal controls that have been set out. Now policies and procedures are also internal control tools. That's what it is. Reduce redundancy, which means improving efficiency. Now, these are some. Then the more important thing is, if you have good, strong internal controls, then you will attract capital and funds. Now, as far as for profits are concerned, they will invest investors, they will get investors, and they'll get capital. Whereas, as far as not for profits are concerned, we will attract donors and we will attract donor funds. Now, internal controls, just like the organizational institutional framework that we had seen in the last two sessions, internal control gives donors confirmation that their funds will be efficiently utilized and the outputs will be effective. That's the efficiency effectiveness kind of a relationship. So that is what internal controls are. Now, having understood internal controls, what are the types of internal controls that we can put in place. One is preventive control, which is the best kind of controls that can be put in. So, having understood where your organization is, then that's very important. You see, we are not talking of copycat situation where you are copying documents from one organization to another. At the stage of our evolution and at the stage of our operation, what are the controls that need to be put in place is the policies and procedures that we should work out. I have seen very small, medium organizations coming out with finance policies running into 200 pages. Now you ask them from one of the page, what is it? What is this particular page talking about? They will have no answers. So when I say policies and procedures that, that have approvals, that have authorizations, those have verifications, which is related to the level of your operation and the stage at which you are in your evolution process. That's what is actual preventive control in true spirit and letter and implementation. Detective control is basically finding out a control deficiency during a certain audit, a physical inventory, or some kind of reconciliation that you do of your accounts or your bank. That is where you detect a control error and which you had not initially thought of, because if you had thought of it, you will have included that as a preventive control. Okay, why I'm talking about this preventive controls is because now next we will go into the various areas of internal control, and this will give you an idea as to how to start thinking in terms of setting up internal controls. I would like to quickly say what I have been talking about is an entire wish list or a laundry list. We may not be at, if all of us may not be at the same keel and pace at which we will be able to address all of this. However, these presentations that are there are not from anywhere but my own experience, because they are not available anywhere in public. I can tell you that in this country you can go to social media, you can go anywhere, and this is the sum and summary of probably our this the long grind that we have gone through in terms of our own professional work. So detective controls is basically when you do physical inventory, when you do some kind of an audit, when you do some kind of reconciliation, it's when you detect it and you find, well, I did not address this in the first stage. Doesn't matter. You have the next stage, which is corrective control. So you correct that by introducing a certain control tool or mechanism. And that control mechanism from that day will become the preventive control from that day. Okay, because now you have addressed that control deficiency. Last one is physical controls, which is basically your security of your office, security of your of your cash, security of your fixed assets, and all that is physical control. So these are types of internal controls that are there. Now, these internal controls form the basis for internal controls in various areas. And that's how you'll put them in place. Now, what donor due diligence does is it, as I said, donor due diligence has not to be looked at negatively. It has to also be looked at positively as an opportunity for us to showcase our organization, to look at possibilities where we did not look at. We in not for profit just look very straight, and I've been telling everybody, probably you have to look out of the box in terms of understanding what's happening in the outside world. It's very, very archaic, still very, very archaic, and it doesn't really work because things have, the progression is so quick and so much, unless you move up on the learning curve, baat banne wali nahi hai. So what I'm saying is that donor due diligence also is some kind of a detective control, which gives you a feedback for ensuring preventive control. And therefore, all donor due diligence, whenever it is done, has to be looked at very, very constructively. Just as I suggest, audit has to be looked at constructively. Similarly, donor due diligence. And donor due diligence itself will throw a lot of areas for preventive controls to be put in place, because they have also detected certain control errors or deficiencies. Now, I come to what donors focus on in terms of the various areas of internal controls during their due diligence. Now, I have categorized these into 11 buckets here. The one is on governance and delegation. So I again want to relate it like this. The areas of governance that we had seen in session 1 was our dictate by our constitutional document what the governance should be, and is the governance in the constitutional document in line with law. However, if we are now understanding that the governance document per se, as I told you, governance documents are never seen once constituted. And when there's a small question on whether this governance document is complete, or whether this particular thing should have been added given the change in regulations, or the changes that you have done yourself within your organization, has that gone to the to the registering or the constitutional document, is something that I was talking about when we were talking of the institutional side of our organization. Now here we have to execute the all the provisions relating to governance and delegations as far as our organization is concerned. So what is it that donors will look at when they look at governance and delegations? And I put down two slides on this, as though if I were the donor, what will I do? Accounts, finance, cost budgets, budgetary control, HR, procurement, inventory, fixed asset management, grants and donor management, cash bank, statutory proceedings, and any kind of penalties, MIS, and the last one is record, basically the accounting record and retention. Now, these are some of the areas that you will find in the checklist. You may not find them directly, but when the due diligence process happens is when you will find that reflection. So I go to the first area, which is on governance and delegation. Now, please be with me in terms of understanding each of these points, because these are points that have come out of having done conducted due diligence in various internal control areas. Now, what is it that the constitutional document talks about in terms of your, for instance, if you have a society or you have your Section 8 company, what's the general body and the governing body constitution? Now the has the process of appointment, has the process of changing the board members or general body members, how process of rotation, has it been implemented, has it been done as is mentioned in the constitutional document? So the constitutional document's role in terms of setting up the institution comes to an end when the constitution document is correctly formulated. But now the constitutional document has to be executed as we move on a day-to-day basis. Now, so that is what we are referring to. Now, if you have members on your governing and general body which have too long a holding of these positions, then that is looked at as a negative thing, which doesn't bring that freshness as far as the board or the general body is concerned. So one has to look at that. Now, if the founder is the chief functionary for a very long duration, then the donor wants to evaluate against the strategic contribution during such period that this particular founder as chief functionary has brought about. Now that is something that becomes very important for these donors. The third thing is, who are the key office bearers? So generally in organizations, you would have the chair, you would have secretary, you will have the treasurer. These are three kind of statutory positions that we would have in organizations. Now, the point is that these positions are evaluated very critically, okay, in terms of their association, in terms of their past track record, both in terms of experience and education, so that, and also what has been their contribution like to this organization. Now, it's very, very important. What we do, we just give the list of these governing body members and say, this is our list. Then the donors start asking, when were these rotated? When were these changed? How long have they been there? Is there a a proper record of the change having been documented, having been done as per the rules in various meetings. That's where the problem starts. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that we have to be very mindful of the chronology of these changes, as well as the documentation of these changes, as well as having requisite information of these key positions, so that that gives that level of comfort to the donor. Okay, now uh, direct blood, or a relative, or a general, or a relative in the sense of the definition of relative, is a negative, because it impacts the independence of the board. So this is something that donors look at very, very closely. Okay, now, specified persons, again, as per Section 13 of the Income Tax Act, what are the transactions and what is the kind of benefits that the Section 13 three persons are taking? So these would include the founders, the settlers, the relative of the founder settler, okay? Then even people who are managing the affairs of the organization, they are also part of Section 13. Now, so the Income Tax Act specifies, and you all know that these are what are called specified persons, and you will have to make report for these people. I am not saying that you cannot give benefit to these people. You can give benefit, but the benefit has to be reasonable, because there is that much less arm's length relationship between these people and the actions that they do. That's what the main premise is for Section 13 to be considered as a separate section. And such benefits, if they are given, which are unreasonable, can be disallowed as an application from your expenditure. That is what you would also know. So Section 13 people, very careful in terms of what their status is. Any beneficial relationship with any other organization, that needs to be also clearly articulated, clearly captured, and made to understand. So the governing body members, the list is completely updated with the now what actually happens is that the donor will come and say, where's the general governing body list? You will make a governing body list, then they will ask you, is the governing body list updated with the registrar? So you will now there like to look at, did we file this with the registrar? Was there a requirement for filing it with the registrar? If there is, please have the as I had mentioned, when we are talking about compliances related to constitution, is when we are talking about your trust. Generally, unless the trust act says, the trust do not have this requirement, but societies and companies definitely have these requirements, which at times the organizations may not be complying with, unless they are exempt by specific state society acts from filing, from annual filing, which does not normally happen. So whether with the registering authority, the list is there, whether on Darpan the list is there, whether the list is the updated list as far as FCRA is concerned, all this needs to be looked at and kept ready when the donor is asking us this. Now, these points that I'm mentioning to you is nothing but like a ready reckoner for you when you have to face a donor in terms of your execution of your governance part of your organization, not in terms of the foundation of the governance part. Okay, so what was the requirement of the number of meetings? What was the requirement of the time gap between two meetings? What is the constitutional document saying? What is the act saying? If it's a companies act, for instance, the act provides for that. What is the document saying? Are we holding those meetings? Is the procedure laid down in the constitutional document in terms of the notices, the period of notice, and the decisions are recorded? Are they minuted? Are they put in a minutes register? Is there a register of the governing body members? All that, and the general body members, all those things have to be put in place in terms of showing your execution ability in terms of the governance part as far as internal controls are concerned. Okay. Uh, I also find that, while the roles and responsibilities of the general body and the governing body is specified in the constitutional document, The meetings are not done for business which are related to their roles and responsibilities. Now, for instance, the general body, because there's no understanding of what action can be taken by the general body and what action can be taken by the governing body. The general body is the body which takes very little limited decisions. Okay, they take decisions about statutory audit, which decision is never part of their annual general meeting. Most of the times I have found that the statutory auditor appointment is not part of it, except for Section 8 companies, because the Section 8, because the Companies Act requires that the statutory auditor's appointment needs to be filed within the next period of time with the ROC. Okay, that is the reason why it doesn't say so much for the society or for general trust. That is the reason. So what I'm trying to say is that the decision about approval of budgets, approval of statutory accounts, approval of statutory auditors, and within time is something that, so what I'll do is I will say, when was your last AGM held? You will say XYZ date. I will then see whether the roles and responsibilities, which are very few as far as the general body is concerned, have they been performed by the general body as far as the general AGM is concerned? Have they approved the statutory accounts? I will find that the statutory accounts have been signed by the statutory auditor much before the time, that before the date of or the holding of the annual general meeting. And in the annual general meeting, the item related to approval of statutory or the audited or the draft audited accounts may not be a part of the, the item of business. So what I'm trying to say is that unless you have a more holistic, clear understanding of your actions, and one action taking, affecting the other, you will, and for due diligence people, it's very easy to know whether this is correct or not. I can tell you from seeing the general body meeting or the governing body meeting minutes whether that action has happened, because there are five other ways of reconciling or validating whether whatever you are writing in the minute books is or the minutes or the proceedings is correct or not. That is exactly what I'm trying to say. So it's not good to have shortcuts, not good to make, many times I've seen, like I'll do a due diligence and say last 2 years or last 23, 24, or we are closing 24, 25 now. Even for 23, 24, how many meetings were supposed to be held? The chief functionary would not really be very up to date. They'll say, I'll get back to you, sir. Then I'll say, okay, we needed to have 4 meetings. Okay, so we will find that in the charter, it's mentioned once every month. That must have been 20 years back that they must have talked of one every month, because it was such a small organization. They haven't changed that. Okay, now they'll say four in a, that again itself is a problem. Now I'll say, when were those meetings held? Then, here and there. Then I'll say, can I get the minutes? You can read from the minutes and say those all minutes or proceedings have just been prepared for the sake of sharing it with us. So, what I'm trying to say? It's better to be, transparent. As I had said earlier, it's better to be responsible than to give information which only adds to red flags of your organization versus the donor. But if you're not able to do it, please do it. Now, going further in terms of governance and delegations, we have these so-called subcommittees generally, okay, of the board. Now, please remember that the subcommittee of a board is not the approving authority. They are only a body or a committee of the board, and they can only recommend for a particular matter that has been assigned to them by the board. I find that decisions that have been taken by the subcommittees have just been implemented without a formal ratification or approval of those recommendations by the general board, by the governing body. Because the governing body will hold all execution related or executive related decision making as far as the organization is concerned. It's not bad. It's no problem to have subcommittees, because that gives more focus and sharpness to, to your actions. So if you have a finance and audit committee, you have an HR committee, you might have a grantee selection or any kind of committee where you may bring in even external people, because the charter might say, well, you can get these subcommittees constituted for specific areas, and please bring subject matter specialists as observers, as external persons out besides the people in your governing body, because they may not be subject matter specialists. Doesn't matter. It only gives you the best of the two worlds in terms of getting people on board for a particular purpose and for the governing body to get the maximum advantage out of this. So subcommittee recommendations, not approval. Demonstration. Now, the governance should be able to demonstrate their strategic guidance, their compliance, their internal controls through policies and procedures. So this is what I call, and when we were talking in the first session, I called that the governance part of an organization is nothing but the fiduciary responsibility, which is nothing else but this. How do you demonstrate that you have taken this organization in a certain direction? Again, linked to your mission, vision, and core values. You remember I was talking to you about one of the institutional areas, which was mission, vision, core values. Now, it's not just academic, it's part of the DNA of every organization and every individual that is working in your organization. If you want to make your organization big, how have they worked? How have they delivered on the mission and vision? I don't see any kind of that documentation. And if you are able to demonstrate that documentation, I tell you, it will give a different level of, privilege to you as an organization. Okay. Now, certain things that you need to see as far as composition of general body of your governing body is concerned, public servants. Now, public servants is something which is defined in the IPC. Section 21. And you can see one has to be careful when you are, and more specifically when you are getting FCRA funding. You cannot be providing FCRA fundings to public servants, okay, unless they have another relationship with you, which is a professional relationship. Similarly, political affiliations, religious affiliations, faith-based affiliations is something that you have to be very careful of in terms of the various laws. And it's more specifically to do with the FCRA law. It's sometimes to also to do with, your income tax law. So one has to be mindful of having those associations and affiliations. Okay. Uh, Political nature, party politics, all something which will actually bring, a question mark to the organization's, registrations and things like that. Does the organization, understand the boundaries when, especially when you're working in areas like advocacy, rights, entitlements, activism? So, are you clearly understanding what is it? What is the law saying? What are the various laws saying in terms of understanding that you are within the boundaries, and therefore you do not cross boundaries and actually get into trouble in terms of your registrations or your approvals? That is something that needs to be understood, especially that's the responsibility of the governance part. So these are some of the areas of governance and delegation that I want to tell you. These are not specifically for the sake of saying, these are actually actionable and may not be actionable in the next 6 months, but have an action plan to action them in the next 2 years. Coming back to now accounts and finance, what do we need to know that donors look at? Donors look at fund-based accounting. Now, when I talk to a lot of organizations, what is fund-based accounting? They say, we don't know what is fund-based accounting. And that's the basis of accounting for a not-for-profit. When we talk of not-for-profits, we are calling it fund-based accounting. And this is so common, so common term in the not-for-profit sector elsewhere. But for our people, and more specifically for our accounting people also, not leave aside the chief functionary, what fund-based accounting means is that we are accountable for each and every fund separately. Okay. We are to look at each stream of fund separately, and that's what the donor is looking at. you know in our organizations, not for profit organizations, all funds are not fungible. Fungible ka matlab, all funds is not as they all become a common pool and you cannot decipher which fund is which fund. In not for profit, the basis of accounting is that you should be able to show to each donor that you have respected their funds in terms of recognition, in terms of utilization, and in terms of closing balance. That is what is called as fund based accounting. Now, are you practicing fund based accounting? Is the biggest question that a donor will have. The donor is, except for the state of health of your organization that we were talking of, state of health, okay, state of financial health of your organization, which your financial statements will show. And mind you, my chief functionaries, my accountants, my heads, they are very little understanding of the audited financial statement. कुछ भी पूछ लो, बोलेंगे इधर उधर देखने लगेंगे, ऑडिटर से फोन करके पूछने लगेंगे, is exactly red flags, because you have signed that financial report. And if you are not able, and that's how due diligence guys will come and say, can you explain to me the reason for this? But you haven't seen, you have just signed the audited financial. Kahan sign karna hai bataiye. Okay, so that's something that so when we are talking of the state of financial health, that's at the macro level. But when it comes to a donor, in terms of its own fund, they are not interested in fungibility. They are interested in seeing each of them is interested in being able to have a visibility of their fund very clearly everywhere, both in bank as in your books, as well as in your advances or anywhere, or in terms of your application or expenditure, whatever it is. And that's what is called the fund based accounting. Now, that is so basic to organizations, but I'm sorry, many organizations and their manpower have no understanding. And therefore, unless you understand, unless that just as the mission vision, just as that is so critical in terms of your what is the reason for your being in this organization. Okay, that's what is mission vision. Okay, very simply. Similarly, what is it that you have to have in your mind in terms of understanding donor funds? These are all specific for an outcome under a particular budget for a particular outcome or output, whatever, an output and all put together outcome. So that is what I'm actually trying to say. So donors want to understand whether you understand fund based accounting. Donors want to see your finance policy. और मैंने यहाँ पे लिखा है in letter and spirit. Okay, I have seen finance policies and it takes 5 minutes to understand whether that finance policy is implemented. So if you are not implementing it in letter and spirit, have a finance policy which may be very rudimentary, very basic, but which can be demonstrated in terms of your records and your action and your understanding. This is what I would want to say. So in finance and accounts, they will, and that this is one basic policy that they will ask, because this is one key policy that every donor will ask you, just to see what are the internal controls around finance and accounts to ensure that their fund is safe. Okay, what we had seen in session one, what donors look at, they look at security. Okay, so this is a document which provides from a framework for giving them an assurance about the security of their funds. लेकिन अगर if the document has just been copy pasted, please remember that is a very big red flag. So please have a 5-page finance policy, no problem. But you should be able to demonstrate and show that it is actually being implemented. And that is not very difficult. Your accounting records, your procurement records, your travel records, they will all validate or show whether that policy is actually implemented in letter and spirit. Okay. The accounting software that you use. So I have a lot of these small organizations which say, well, we are still following accounting on manual basis. We have been recommending, please come at least onto Tally so that it brings more semblance of of a particular system. People are using both manual and accounting software. Please delete manual ways of working, because your governing body or your FAC members might be 70-year-old, and he's been talking about manual thing, and he's been talking about manual ways of working. That is not required, as we will see in terms of accounting records ka kis what is the form in which those accounting records have to be prepared. And they don't just say manual or print, they say many other options. Okay, so let's look at the accounting records, the basis of accounting. Please move to accrual based accounting even if you are doing cash basis, because that is the recommended way in which books of accounts have to be maintained. Now, what are the accounting records that you have maintained? Okay. How have you maintained them? I'm not getting into those details. So, your vouchers, your supportings to those vouchers. Have you, meaning the purchase, if there's a purchase voucher, the purchase order, the contracts, the approvals, the printouts of those vouchers, the filing of those vouchers. How have those been all kept? I am told that people are maintaining manual, accounting documents, and they are inputting data into accounting software after maintaining it and manual and not taking printout. So better to only do the accounting software and take printout from the software which is more valid. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that you have to have a proper system which should actually be dictated by your finance manual or your finance policy. But the donors do look at that. How systematic have you been in terms of not only the spend, which is the program piece of their due diligence or the program piece of their monitoring, but in terms of recording, which is the finance bit. Monthly and annual closing of books. Okay. Delegation metrics for approval. Is there a delegation metrics? How has it been delegated? Is it in line with the constitutional requirements? Okay. If there is constitutional requirement saying something which is not practical, has that amendment been made? Okay. Maintenance of book accounts, which we'll actually see. Now, the law in income tax now mandates not for profits to maintain books of accounts and other documents in a certain fashion. Okay, and what are the books of accounts, and what are the records that need to be maintained? We will see it as one of the last ones. The people who are managing the accounting and the finance staff. Now, this is a big, dilemma small organizations, medium organization face in terms of being able to have full-time people. But even if you have part-time people, what is their competence level? Segregation of duties, again, the checks and balances that I'm talking about. One person's work in finance needs to be, balanced or checked by another person. And do you have that kind of a mechanism? Now, I see many small medium organizations having a lot of these, accounting staff doing the same thing. Okay, doing the same thing, because there is no segregation of duties and specialization. Segregation of duties, what does it do? It brings specialization in that area of segregation, and that is what you should be attempting at. Because once everybody knows this is my specialization, they will improve that specialization or awareness or education, and then become a check and balance also. Okay, separate accounting for FC, for your local operations, for your foreign contribution operations, for your business. If you are doing any incidental business, that also has to have separate books of accounts. This is now as per law. Now, I was just talking to somebody a couple of days back in terms of 31st December being the last date for FCRA return. And this chief functionary is running a 3-5 crores, whatever turnover, and he has signed the FCRA balance sheet. And when I asked him, where is your FCRA balance sheet for 23-24, which will be required for purposes of preparing the FC4 data, he was looking here and there, because he did not know that for FCRA registered entities, you have a consolidated accounts financial, and you have an FCRA which is drawn or derived from the consolidated financials. Now, it's very important to understand that you have separate accounting for all that. Data security, backup, how have you kept them? How has the archiving done? Because financial data is the backbone, just as we might say program data. Okay. Many organizations do concurrent audit. The medium sized organization have started in doing once every 3 months. The internal, or either you have internal audit once every 3 months, or you might also have a concurrent auditor who will validate as you do the transactions. So if your transactions are more and complicated, you could have concurrent auditors, or you must have a system of at least half yearly internal audit, so that any mistake that has happened during this period can be corrected in future. That's what the detective controls will bring about preventive controls. So if you have HO branch accounting, you have to be very careful in terms of understanding who does what and how consolidation happens. This is something that becomes very important where operations are, accounting operations are, are across geographies, because the operations are across geography. Now, when we come to the third area, which is cost budgets and budgetary controls, what should we understand? Now, please understand the concept of cost. In not-for-profits, the cost concept has to be understood not exactly in terms of the natural head, but in terms of the functional head. What does it mean? Simply stating, okay, and that is what will change your thinking about cost. The cost in not-for-profit is not the salary, it's not the travel, it's not the the office rent. All costs in your organization. What is the cost is the natural head. Why the cost is more important when it comes to donors? इस कॉस्ट को क्यों किया गया, क्यों, why? And that brings the functional aspect of cost, which is the basic idea behind not for profit organization. That's what should be the basic. It's not, you know many income tax authorities, they, when we send them the financials which says expenditure, salary, travel, they say you are not entitled for salary, you are not entitled for travel, because your organization is not meant, does not have that kind of heads of income and heads of expenditure. What did the salary do? The salary did two things. That is the functional aspect of a cost. And that's very important to understand for people when, and also donors look at that. So two things is what all costs will do for a not-for-profit organization. One, program delivery. That's the function. That's the functional aspect of a cost. What has the cost done? It has brought about program delivery. It has brought about research. It has brought about MEL. Okay. Or it has been a support cost, as what we also sometimes call it as admin loosely. But all costs will have the semblance of a function in two broad categories: program delivery and support cost for program delivery. अब ये अंडरस्टैंडिंग आपको होगी जब आपको ये समझ आएगा कि डोनर जब आपकी कॉस्ट देख रहा होगा तो आपके लिए सैलरी इंपॉर्टेंट है, या आपके लिए ओवरऑल कॉस्ट में प्रोग्राम डिलीवरी कितना कॉस्ट कर रहा है, and which is something which every donor will be delighted with. And how much is your shared cost, or shared support cost, or your administrative cost, as you might call it, for delivering or supporting the program. That should be the basis for your evaluation and your understanding, and that should also be the basis on the basis of which you should present your financial statements. Okay. So when the budgets are looked at in terms of costs, what is, at the end of the day, the donor will want to find out how much of this 1 rupee went to facilitate or bring about the change that we wanted to bring in the community, or the benefit to the beneficiary or the target group or the target audience, whatever you might call it, and how much money was required to support this program delivery, which is also required. But that's the functional part that you have to look at. So the costs have to be looked at in terms of functional, not in terms of their natural head. जब ये आप सोचेंगे तब आपका बजट बनाने का, बजट कंस्ट्रक्शन का तरीका टोटली चेंज हो जाएगा. So when we talk of costs, and I'm not getting into the definition of costs, but I'm talking of costs is I'm talking of costs in terms of what they deliver for the donor, money that the donor is giving to us. Now, you must also, when we are looking at cost budget and budgetary control, very, very important this slide. I mean, I can just say this. How you will implement this is your business. Okay, I can only say this. It's very critical. Okay. Now, when you budget costs, do you have a policy framework? And this is the one big area of concern. If you are budgeting costs, you are and you do not have a policy framework, it's a catch 22 situation. आप कॉस्ट पूरी तरह से बजट नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि आपकी पॉलिसी नहीं है. Suppose you don't have an HR policy or you don't have a breakdown of the salary of your possible staff or your staff that you want to earmark on this particular project. How will you budget it? Then you will only go with that lump sum, archaic figure, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000. Everything that you will do will be wrong, both in terms of doing justice to your employee and also complying with the provisions of laws, okay, various laws. So what happens is that especially for HR, for procurement, for travel, for utilities, you must work out policies. Okay. And so the travel, the utilities, your procurement might be part of your finance manual and your HR breakdown, because HR component, as I said, HR is a program delivery cost, because that HR is not earning salary. It is delivering a program. It is delivering a program. And whether you have correctly allocate, budgeted, not allocated, budgeted HR cost, whether you have correctly budgeted HR cost, how will it be derived unless you have a detailing of that in your HR policy? You will always be losing in terms of the right amount of budget that you should have got. Donor says very good. He will have the last laugh. He will say very good. And then when he comes for the donor audit, the auditor will say you have not complied with the statutory or the social security legislations or rules. Sometimes you might not even know that those rules are applicable, and after 5 years, when the donor project has come to an end, you might be actually paying from your pocket for those kind of obligations. So what I'm saying is that the policy framework is a very important factor for budgeting cost. और वो कब करोगे आप? अभी नहीं करोगे तो कभी भी नहीं कर पाएंगे, और अभी नहीं करोगे तो कभी भी डोनर से चार्ज नहीं कर पाएंगे. Okay, so someday you will have to start, and I'm again saying you may start very small today, and you might, as you evolve, you probably can sharpen it. So it's very, very important. Now, the other thing, which is this, these are all direct costs that we are talking about. Now, when there is a something called shared costs, okay, तो हमने functional cost को देखा था, functional cost, program delivery, and support costs. Now, in these costs, please, 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 I'll give you time to ask questions. Don't worry, please. But you'll have to, help me to, not interrupt the flow. And I would very earnestly urge everybody, please just devote some 1.5 hours, 2 hours to this particular presentation. You will never be able to get this kind of insight ever. This is something that I can underwrite and guarantee to you. So it's not that something that I'm, claiming as something very great, but if you were to have this framework or even these PPTs, and in the next 3 years, get 80% up on these PPTs, I think your job is done. Now, what happens is that you have these direct costs and you have these common costs. Common cost means that those costs are costs that are so. Jyoti Shankar Das, please mute yourself, please. Okay. So please don't unmute. So you have direct costs, but you also need direct cost means 100% allocated to the project. But there are certain costs which are needed for running this organization. Now, those are called common costs. I'm not getting into those details. Uh, we'll need a separate session on that. So, but what you need to know is that it is not only direct costs that have to be asked from the donor, a lot of the common costs which will be apportioned to the project, and a method has to be calculated, computed, which is what is called your common cost policy. It's not a very difficult thing, but unless you are able to recover your total cost, which is not just direct cost for the delivery of your program, but is also shared cost, which has to be given, which cannot be given 100% by this project, but has to be given in a certain percentage. And that percentage is based on your historical cost or your budgets, whichever way. And that percentage needs to be claimed from the donor. Otherwise, where will you get the money from? We are not a for-profit entity where we have a buffer or we have generated profits. We are a fund accounting principle based organization. Okay, so we will account for your funds, but somebody has to account for our shared cost. Okay, now the budget formulation and approval process has to be there in organizations. I find that that is not there. And unless you have that seriousness of the budget preparation or formulation process, you must have a annual exercise. Even if you have two donors or three donors or one donor or two donors, even then please introduce the system of having an annual budgeting exercise. The budget should be approved both by the governing body and the general body in their respective meetings as provided in the constitutional documents. So you must have your master budget, and that master budget will have the organization's other costs and also the projects that you have. I don't find that happening because there is no semblance of any kind of annual budgeting process. You must have that because it will bring a lot of discipline to your financial work and a lot of discipline in your thought process. That's the soft part of the budgeting process. Now, the templates of donors in terms of budgeting might be different. Okay, all donors may have different templates, but you will have basic, the basic information will be the same. The level of effort, how much is the level of effort? Again, the level of effort decides whether it's a direct cost, 100%, or is a shared cost. Okay. And the level of effort, if it is shared, how will you justify that this is the right amount of shared cost to your project is the question. And this question you will have answer only if you have a common cost policy. नहीं तो आपको donor अड़ने ही नहीं देगा. Okay. The unit of measurement, some of the people here are donors. I don't mean to have any kind of, critical, view on this, but I'm just, trying to help my NPO folks. The unit of measurement, okay? What is the unit of measurement? It's lump sum, it's round trip, it's monthly, whatever. क्या यूनिट कॉस्ट है? अब यूनिट कॉस्ट जो है ना, बुलेट नंबर 2 से निकल के आना चाहिए. So what I'm trying to say is that the unit cost should get derived from policy, not from your mind or from a certain person's thinking process. Okay, only then it will not be contested by the donor. So the budget will be both at the activity level and at the budget line, at the line level, budget line level, which is the sum total of the activity for that budget line. And the budget lines generally would be, the broader lines of activity, which could be HR, which could be, or you might call all of them program delivery, doesn't matter. And within that, you can do it. So there is no hard and fast rule, but we must understand that the line is towards a particular function, and the function for an NPO is program delivery and support cost. Now, the budget, the three things that I want to mention here: budget monitoring process. Is there a budget monitoring process in this organization? Now, this has to be documented. If it is documented, the donor will be very happy, very, very happy, and not very difficult. In fact, the budget monitoring should be part of our routine periodic activity to see where we are actually versus the budget estimates. And you can set it up in Tally. You can draw those variance reports from Tally within seconds without even extra cost or resources or software. But it's again a matter of bringing in that kind of thought process. Then the reporting of expenditure versus the budget to the donors. Okay. Now, what I mean to say is, what is the periodicity in your contracts? Are you doing it? If you do it 3 days before the due date, I tell you, you will get a lot of brownie points. Okay. Will you do it? Is it needed on a rolled up basis? Okay. At the line item level, or is it at the activity level? How much is the, what is the way that they want you to report? So reporting also is very, very important in terms of, the donor understanding. And this might be more relevant when the donor is coming to you for a repeat grant. The last is budgetary control. Now, the budgetary control comes out of budget monitoring. So the budget monitoring will throw up variance, okay? Because why will the variance be there? Because actuals will never be in line with the estimate. It cannot be. Estimates are hypothetical to a certain extent because they are, that is why they are estimates or certain assumptions based on certain assumptions. The actuals have to be different. If the actuals and the budget estimates are totally matching, again, that's a red flag. So the budgetary control process is the outcome of the monitoring process, but it is slightly different. So monitoring throws up the variance, and the budgetary control happens in terms of action that you will take based on the variance that has been thrown up in the budget monitoring exercise. Okay. And what does the budgetary control lead to? So the variance that has been thrown has to be evaluated in terms of action that you will take versus the for the project versus the donor. And budgetary control needs again to be taken up. Control has to be done in such a manner that you take up action with the donor in time, because if you do not take the action in time, then the donor is not going to accept any of your request. So budget realignments, budget reallocation, no cost extensions, all those are going to be thrown out of the budget monitoring exercise as a method of budgetary control. हमारा बजट के ऊपर क्या कंट्रोल है? मॉनिटरिंग तो एक एक्टिविटी है जिसने की एक पर्टिकुलर सेट ऑफ नंबर्स थ्रो करे। उस नंबर्स के थ्रो करने पे व्हाट इज इट दैट वी हैव taken as action is what is the budgetary control. Now this particular slide is such a lot of concentrated matter that I cannot tell you. I cannot get into this, otherwise we'll do the entire presentation on this. But what I'm trying to say is that for donors, not only in terms of due diligence, but in terms of your own proposal and budgets, it becomes very, very important. They are very clear. And therefore, unless you are on top of the cost piece of your particular organization and your program, you will always struggle, not only in terms of getting approvals, but implementing and reporting and closing. Every which way you will have a problem. And there will be a, you might say, well, this is something very hypothetical, but let me tell you, if you put that in place, a lot of hypothetical situations will automatically get in order. I agree. Still, there will be some amount of variations and grayness, which we will have to do as a matter of decision making. That's the difference in terms of risk appetite and risk tolerance. But उतना ही करना हमको जरूरी पड़ेगा. The other things will already be in place and will be in place for everybody in the organization to understand that it is in place. Next, human resources. So the one big thing that all organizations look at is human resource policy. Now again, letter and spirit, I want to tell you, is it being implemented is the important thing. Now I don't want to get into each of these. So for instance, the HR policy will give a semblance of the mission, vision, and values. Very important from the point of view of the donor. Very important from the point of view of each person, right from the chief functionary to the foot soldier. Are right from the chief functionary to the foot soldier clear about why we are, what is this organization meant for, what Why are we there, and am I doing the right kind of thing for this organization? That is the mental thought process that starts working once you are able to imbibe the mission, vision, and values, not just make them as statements. People, bigger organization, they always struggle to bring the mission, vision, and values in the heart of the organization staff, because unless the organization staff is able to have it in his heart, he or she will not get his or her heart out for you in the organization, for you to deliver. Ultimately, who delivers in organizations? The organization has no mind, it has no hands, it has no legs. We are the people. So the mission, vision, values for the organization is a speaking document, or a speaking thing for people who are trying to ensure that mission, vision, values of the organization are delivered. And because they have to understand, and they will, if they deliver, is when we will be able to say our mission, vision, and values have been delivered. Also the alignment of the donor to our mission, vision, value, now they will see whether our alignment is there to the mission, vision, and values of this organization. Very important. And this is at the macro level. All right, it's not a matter of just saying, it's a matter of assimilation, right from the chief functionary to the foot soldier. I tell you, it is going to bring about a different perspective, a different spirit in the people that work for you in the organization. The organizational structure, what is it? Is part of the HR manual, and it's always asked for by donors. Okay, not only the organization structure, but also what is the current structure. Not only the, the estimated organizational structure, as I would call it, or the conceived organizational structure, but what is the organization structure as it is today, not only in terms of your organization, but also in terms of your financial accounts. Now, various areas related to recruitment, selection, engagement, compensation, is all that is very, very important for these due diligence. Because, when they will say, well, this particular project has these many staff have to be against contracts. And there is where the whole dilemma: should we have employee contracts, should we have contract, or should we have consultant contract, is something that brings in this kind of a conversation. I'm not getting into that conversation. However, you have to decide when to bring a person as an employee, when to bring a person as a direct cost employee, whether how many people have to be shared cost employees, how long can you have a person as a consultant? Is a consultant not replacing the normal employee duties? If it is, then it's not a consultant. It is uh, tantamounts to being an employee. Contractual employment is very, very common in our structure, but the new labor laws is going to create a problem in terms of employment, contract employment, especially for core services, meaning those services which are related to program delivery. But that's supposed probably going to come from 1st of April 2025 is when we understand that the new labor codes are going to come into place. And therefore, if people have been with me in terms of understanding the intricacies of those codes, the contract labor for core activity or for the purpose for which you are existing will is something that will become very, very difficult. Compensation, very important. That is all that I can say at this stage. The breakup of compensation is something that helps you not only in terms of compliances, that helps you in terms of your being able to do justice to your employee, that helps you to be able to budget correctly. Okay, that's all the three things that will be all take the check boxes. If you do not have that, then probably always you will be doing here and there. Then the employee benefits. So again, leave, insurance, gratuity. Have you budgeted there? Have you budgeted that? You might have an encashment of leave, which you may not have budgeted because you don't know. You might have gratuity by default because your number of people are more than 10. You have gratuity applicability. Uh, and suddenly one fine morning you have gratuity liability, but you haven't claimed that from the donors anyways. You have not got it funded. Okay. payroll and allocation of employee costs. That's basically the salary register, how payments payroll has been allocated. Very important for donors, because when they look at salary costs, they will look at direct costs. They might not look at shared costs completely, but they would definitely look at direct costs. Have direct costs been paid out? Have they been paid out properly or not? Okay. Similar to the payroll is the attendance or timesheet, and as far as foreign donors are concerned, performance, disciplinary action. Okay. Uh, so these are the understanding of the various social security laws is very important for HR costing. It's very important for the existence of your organization. It is very important for the compliance levels of your organization. And it is very essential to claim this from the donors, which the donors will never be able to say no, as long as you will be able to tell them this is part of the legal framework that is there in this country. But because we ourselves have no understanding or very little understanding, is therefore the reason why we are not able to claim it. So we are losing all the way, basically. Now, the team due diligence is something that is, just as we did market due diligence when we are talking of visibility, the team due diligence is basically the organizations, the due diligence by the donor in terms of the leadership. Okay. And when I say leadership, I was talking of the governance structure, where we were also talking about what is the vintage, what is the strategic contribution at times for bigger projects and for long-term engagements. There is this so-called team due diligence that is also done by donors. Procurement. Okay. Now, procurement means that why is procurement so important for donors? Okay, so procurement will again be the part of the what will it be part? It's a functional cost. It helps you to deliver the program. You need to purchase certain things. You need to purchase certain items or certain goods which are needed for this particular program. So not only program goods, but also assets. So program goods, which might also which is specific to the program, but inventory of other things, various administrative reasons, or fixed assets is something that that is also funded by these donors. So when it comes to program goods, whether it comes to normal inventory, when it comes to fixed assets, is something that the donors would want to see has been done transparently and efficiently. Efficiently means, have we paid the right amount of money that should have been paid through a certain due diligence process, which is laid out in your procurement policy. So as we were talking of HR, we were talking of procurement policy. So every organization will say, well, do you have a procurement policy? Again, the procurement policy is not for the sake of taking out from file and showing it to the donor. Procurement policy can be a part of the finance policy, may not be a separate policy. So you may have your procurement policy, which may be very, very simple, not doesn't matter. But have you followed the procurement policy when you have procured these program goods, whether you've procured normal inventory, whether you procured fixed assets? So sometimes donors will ask for sample transaction, just to see whether they are in line with the policy or not. Now, you must have your procurement policies simple, so that there is understanding in your staff and your team, and compliance of the policy is possible. Sometimes I find that the policy has nothing to do with the organization, but that's called the procurement policy. So better tell them we don't have a procurement policy. That will not be a red flag. That will be a a something which is not a checkbox, but at least it will not show that the procurement policy is there but is not being followed. That's even more dangerous. Okay. I'm not saying don't have a procurement policy. Have a reasonable, simple procurement policy which depicts the level and the status and the progress that you are at as far as an organization is concerned. That will be appreciated and respected by the donors, I can tell you. Sometimes please remember that the donors might have their own procurement policies. Okay, so you have to be careful that when you take donor money, whether they will ask you to follow their procurement policies and guidelines, and in that case you will have to follow their procurement policy and guidelines, just to see that there is no disallowance. तो बहुत important है. Sometimes you might have a procurement policy and they might say, well, please show that procurement policy. If that is okay, then we'll allow your procurement policy. So good to have that. Okay, then they might tell you, well, this procurement policy is okay. You need not follow our procurement policy. Such a good thing, actually. Now, so when it is you have a lot of procurement, do have dedicated admin staff, because the procurement process in terms of identifying vendors, sending out bids, sending out request for proposal, it's a tedious process and it cannot be given to the program person. It has to be done by an admin person because he or she will understand the procurement policy. Conflict of interest, ethics, and transparency issues, very important. So where does this conflict of interest, ethics, and transparency issues come in procurement? They are flagged in audit reports. And if that gets flagged in terms of procurement, conflict of interest and transparency and ethics issues in procurement in audit reports, it becomes a very big red flag. So you have to be very careful. Next comes fixed assets and inventory management. Okay, so you must understand what is the difference between asset and inventory. Now, so you have to follow the procurement policy, something that I had said. Now, at times where a lot of procurement program goods or assets or inventory is a matter of donor funding, then please have proper fixed asset and inventory management policy. Okay, that may be part of your finance policy in terms of how will you record, how will you mark, how will you issue, how will return be there, how will there be, how will you maintain that? What about depreciation? What about verification, loss, okay, sale? All those things should be part of your policy so that it can be, and that's how you should be doing it, not only for your fixed asset but also for your inventory. If you have inventory which is not usable, how will you dispose it of is something that you'll have to see. Insurance assets, so in case of loss or in case of any damage, is there an insurance cover that you have for this fixed assets? And donors might not object to having the insurance cost allocated as a common cost for these assets for their insurance. Recording of, if you have land and building, it becomes definitely a brownie point for you, but you must be able to have them reflected in your books properly and be able to even show it in a certain sense, because it now fixed assets have to be recorded in your fixed assets register. It has to be separately shown in your financials. It has to be separately shown in your uh, FC financials. All that is something. So if it's a foreign donor, you will have to show the assets, and there is now new stipulation in terms of reporting annually fixed assets that you have purchased using fixed foreign contribution, because now the department is trying to see that in case you surrender, you cancel. I mean, I'm not saying that, but if such situations happen, those assets will be with the prescribed authority. They will be taken by the prescribed authority, and that kind of information is there. So you must also see what is the provision relating to fixed assets in the donor contracts. Okay, so what do the donors say in terms of fixed assets? Will they be retained? What is the what compliances you are doing as far as the fixed assets are concerned in your FC annual return? How are you ensuring that there is no uh, major issue that happens in terms of the FC assets getting into trouble because of surrender or cancellation or whatever penal action? So all those things are something that you'll have to see, that at many times the fixed assets are something that might have to be given to the community-led organizations. So you might have to want to see what the provisions are and be prepared accordingly. Cash and bank, very important. So most donors now do like do not like cash handling. They would like to look at cash handling only to the extent of petty cash. So those are small payments which you may not be able to do through normal banking channels. That's what it is. So besides petty cash, most donors do not want to look at cash handling. That is something that I would want to tell you. And the cash handling के लिए सबसे important चीज is that more donors have started asking for bank statements. That bank statement will give you an understanding. Scanning of the bank statement will give you an understanding as to what is the level of cash handling. and you will not be able to, hide that information. Generally, it may not be, but the bank statement will give you this real story. Uh, what is the provision relating to banking in the constitutional document? Okay. Uh, Sometimes it says nationalized bank. आज तक मैं देख रहा हूँ nationalized bank भी बोल रखा है बहुत सारे constitutional documents में. So, uh, uh, lot of organizations, uh, you know, uh, are not looking at insisting on savings bank account, and they are opening current accounts, more specifically because the bank is saying, well, organizations need to open current account. There is an RBI circular very clearly, and lot of banks, on their website are saying that not-for-profit trusts, organizations and trusts will be permitted savings bank account. I would insist that you must, look at this closely, not get guided by what the banker is saying. Okay. And please see what your the constitutional document talks about banking. Banking meaning where will you bank, how will you bank? Okay, because banking is an important part of the constitutional related, whether it's the bylaws or whether it's the AOA, whether it's the trustee. Okay. The local and FCRA accounts, the do's and don'ts is something that you need to be very clear when you have FC funding as well as domestic funding. Very important. Otherwise, it can jeopardize both ways, your income tax charitable status as well as your FCRA registration. I am only saying this for the sake of telling you or drawing your attention. How you will do it is something that you will have to see. We can only draw this attention to you. Well, I have seen only recently some extent, some uh, exception has been made by the MHA in terms of the refund of tax when it comes to the local account. If it is a composite for local and FCRA, then from the local account, you can give the check to the FCRA account to the extent of the refund of TDS or tax, as it is called as far as we are concerned. That's now permitted. Okay, only very recently on 31st. Otherwise, no mixing is allowed. Now, you need to understand what are the rules that need to be respected for these two separate streams of accounting or funding or funds. Uh, so as far as your member list is concerned, please update that on NGO Darpan, because any change or any new bank account now will need to be validated by the banker with your Darpan UIN information, more specifically related to your governing body. They will not open unless your governing body details are updated on Darpan. Dedicated bank account for grants. This is the fund-based accounting concept. Okay. Since the fund-based accounting is by funds as compartments, so the banking also needs to be as compartment. That's the idea, and that is why the insistence on dedicated bank account for grants. It also helps reconciliation. It also helps to know how much is the interest on the grant. It also helps, donors look at only their bit of the grant. Donors, as far as their grant fund is concerned, they are very selfish. They are interested only in the grant. But when it comes to grant, how much grant, then they will look at your bigger picture, your financials. Now, recording and treatment of interest. Okay. When it is in pool account, so you have to have a mechanism which you should be able to tell the donor and satisfy that if I'm getting money in my pool account, which is not dedicated account, then how will I report on interest? Okay. Now, signatories to the bank account. Okay. Again, see the constitution document. Who can be signatories? Okay. It's always good to have non-related people. Okay. Preference should be given to net banking, which is very, very common now. Okay. So, at times these provisions also are overlooked when it comes to banking. So it's very, very important. Please do not have single signatory banking. It's a negative as far as organizing donors are concerned. So the mode of operation of bank accounts, which is what I have said as signatory of the bank account, is also very, very important. Okay. This has implication in terms of, Also in terms of, NGO Darpan, that's what I wanted to say. Bearer payments, and as I said, payments in cash not appreciated. Payments in cash more than 10K per day per to a certain person tracks the 48(3) provision, as you would know, where if it is more than that, then the amount will not be allowed and will be charged to maximum marginal rate of taxation. So please remember, since banking is now universal, it has to be made again a part of your you know actionable, to see that everybody gets onto that pace of doing transaction through the banking channels. Bank reconciliation and follow up is very very important. So most good donors will say, can I look at the bank reconciliation? बहुत सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में बैंक रिकंसिलिएशन मंथली होता ही नहीं. Now, if you do not have bank reconciliation, how do you know how many payments are outstanding, how many have not been paid, and how will you follow up for those payments that have not been made or have, got rejected for whatever reason? I have mentioned minimum visit to banks, okay? Because I see many organizations, because they still work in that same fashion. One person is, dedicated to going every day to the bank and every day coming back with some requirement from the bank. Please reduce your visit to the branch. Okay, that can be done by ensuring that your compliances are proper, by ensuring that compliances that the banks require are proper, by moving to net banking, so that you do most of your banking online. You don't have to do a lot of things. All your bank statements can be online. Your viewing rights can be there even if you are not fully onto bank. So there are various mechanisms and facilities that you should take advantage of, especially in the digital age that we are. That is what I would say. Okay. Banks ask for past 2 years bank statements. So it's always good to have those statements with you, so that you do not have to rush to the bank the moment the checklist comes. They definitely want to. One, they want to see the volume of the banking transaction. Second is they would want to see how much is the cash payment, how much is bearer payment, okay, how much is payment which has been done by the so-called chief functionary on behalf of various programs. All that is the kundli of your banking transaction. 5 minutes of scanning of the bank statement can tell the story about your organization's banking ways of banking. That's what we do. Okay, that's what we do, because we understand where to see the gaps actually, and you need to plug those gaps by doing the right thing. I have known of organizations where they have given us audited financial statements worth 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs in terms of IND, income and expenditure. And when we asked them for their bank statements, the bank statements was not even 1/10 of the volume that they have reported in audited financial statements. We asked them, how did you do the transaction? They said, we did all that transaction in cash, which you will not be able to see on the audited financial statements. So what I'm trying to say is that donors are becoming extra smart in terms of being able to see from five different angles as to whether you are talking the truth or not. Now, grant and donor management, very, very important area of internal control. So what is the for the donor, what matters is what is your current status of grant funding, and this is what is a pain point for most organizations, but has to be overcome. Okay, how you do it is specifically your call, but what I'm saying is that the donor will only fund a fraction of your total income or your budget or your spend for the past maybe 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, whatever. So they will say, जैसे हम CSR के अंदर 2% ऑफ द average net profit in past 3 years is your requirement for CSR. Similarly, the average of your 3 years turnover is the amount of, and 25% of that is probably the maximum. Why? Because again, donors, unacceptable risk नहीं है. There is a risk tolerance which says we can fund only 25% of the volume of this organization. So as the organization will grow, maybe the 25% will also percentage in terms of absolute number will grow. So there's nothing wrong about it. What I'm trying to say is that when you then budget, when you then talk to donors, budget based on all these considerations. Okay. Besides the historical data, donors also ask you what is your pipeline visibility in the next 3 years. Pipeline visibility मतलब आपको क्या आने वाला है, what is your estimation? अरे हमने तो बजट ही इस साल का नहीं बनाया, हमें क्या मालूम 3 साल में क्या आने वाला है. This is the in within the room that answer, not to the donor, but that's not the answer. You see, when the donor is looking at funding you, he's taking a risk with his money. He will, matlab, that donor will try to have all kinds of checks and balances to see that its money is properly protected. The protection is not in terms of the final contract. The final contract से पहले की ये सारी कहानी है. This story is before the contract is finalized. But the donor wants to formulate and execute the contract and have those points written in the contract after being satisfied, in the of about all this that we have studied in the last 3 sessions. समझ गए? इसलिए it's also good to have a fund forecast of your organization for the next 3 years. हो या नहीं हो, doesn't matter. At least हम हमारी अगले 3 साल में हम क्या करेंगे इसके बारे में एटलीस्ट एक रोड मैप तो बनाए, एक स्ट्रैटेजिक प्लान तो बनाए, एक फंड का प्रोजेक्शन तो बनाए, तभी तो हम वहां जा पाएंगे. Otherwise, so, most small medium organizations, we are trying, but some of those, but 5% of this small and medium become big because they have taken these decisions as part of their key strategic decision, and they have become from medium to big. Okay, this is what I would want to say. I'm going to work with an organization which was 20 years back at 20 crores. Now it is at 250 crores because they were progressive in terms of their thinking. It's not the program that you do which matters. It matters, I say. It's the thought process of the leadership and the people who are the second line that changes the tone and the direction of the organization. And all this are, the building blocks for that change. So understanding the donor, okay, so when you position your organization, और ये मैंने point session number 1 में बोला था, how will you position your organization? And this is also a tip in the sense, first, understand who that donor is, from what background it is coming, what cause it is, what is the kind of, so study the donor's website first. And then once that donor approaches you or you approach the donor, then your positioning has to be in line with what the donor's expectations are. Very, very important to understand the donor. So if a donor is approaching you, first sit down and understand what that donor is, which from where that donor is coming from, what is the kind of, uh, the background that it has, the kind of causes that it has funded, what is it that it thinks is the go or no go kind or non-negotiable kind of things that you will take out from understanding their details. Very important. Internal dissemination of grant contract is very important, that I wanted to just say. If you get a contract, understanding and dissemination and execution is very, very important. This is something that we are going to do in the next 2 sessions when we talk about grant management. Grant compliance checklist. Okay, so this is important. You must have a checklist which will cover all these aspects: accounting, reporting, and this can be different for FC project, CSR project. तो जो contract आपने आया, जिस file में you have put that contract, please make a compliance checklist for that particular grant. And that compliance checklist should be with all the people who are involved in that grant contract. This is post a grant contract coming. But earlier grants that you have got, donors would be interested in understanding that. Okay. The accounting for the grant is cost center based, okay, with dedicated accounting staff. It's a very big grant. How is the program and financial reporting? It's very crucial, very crucial. The template, the periodicity, the correctness, all that is very important. Timely require course correction. That was an outcome of our budgetary control idea. Any revisions that have to happen, any community contribution, any leverage, any cost sharing or cost matching, whether you get that cost matching or you get it from another donor, if that is part of your particular grant, then that is also a big advantage as far as donors are concerned. Communication is the key, as I said. So as far as donor management and grant management is concerned, how do you communicate is and the continuation of communication is very critical. I have just mentioned that as communication is key, but this is one very important thing. If you communicate, the moment you strangulate communication, the confidence of the donor in you will come down very dramatically. So it's very important to have constructive communication. Even if you have not done things in the right fashion, nothing is right or wrong, but it is better to be honest and constructive in your communication. This is a matter of habit, it's a matter of culture, it comes from your core values. Okay. Any statutory proceedings and penalties, very important that they will ask you. And sometimes they might even, look at the portals. Income tax के कोई assessments हैं, कोई proceedings हैं, कोई demands हैं. They will ask for your income tax assessments in terms of your proceedings. So they will not just ask you whether you are compliant in terms of IT return, but they will also want to find out whether the IT return has been processed by the department in the way that you have filed. And that's what is the income tax assessment. Now, when you talk to a lot of organizations, they will just say, we don't know what is income tax assessment because we have never seen that. You have seen it, but you have not acknowledged what is income tax assessment is. So it's always good to have in your, in your documentation that you have, and we'll talk about the compliance, the tips for that is not only just the ITR, but the income tax assessment for the various, at least for the last 3 years, any proceedings that are there under any of these laws. Now, any TDS related, both in terms of deposits, in terms of returns, in terms of late deposit, late filing of returns, if there are any kind of proceedings related to that, it'll be easy to find out. FCRA related, you have a list of offenses as far as FCRA is concerned. Have you had those offenses? Have you paid penalty? So also for the social security laws, the small medium organizations have to look at all this. The PF, ESI again is gray, professional tax, gratuity, okay, all those mature maternity benefit, all those social security laws के अंदर कोई proceedings तो नहीं है, कोई shops and establishment act के अंदर तो proceedings नहीं है, GST related, if you are GST registered, any proceedings against the chief functionary and board members, it's important. And that is why at many places you will find that there are undertakings and affidavits and declarations that are being taken in terms of finding out whether there is any kind of proceeding. It's very much an area that donors look at. And this particular slide, they look at that because they want to find out are you compliant or not. तो आपके पास अगर टीडीएस का टैन है तो वो आपका फाउंडेशन है फॉर टीडीएस, जो हमने पहले के अंदर फाउंडेशन इंस्टीट्यूशनल एरिया के अंदर क्या है, टैन होना, टैक्स डिडक्शन एंड कलेक्शन अकाउंट नंबर होना इज योर फाउंडेशन. बट टीडीएस टाइम पे डिडक्ट करना, राइट सेक्शंस में डिडक्ट करना, राइट टाइम पे डिडक्ट करना, राइट टाइम पे डिपॉजिट करना, एंड द रिटर्न्स दैट नीड टू बी फाइल्ड इज what is the internal control part, and whether you have complied with the internal control procedures for TDS as laid down in regulations. That's what we are telling you. So that distinction you have to understand. Here we are talking of the nuts and bolts of that institutional foundation. Okay. And this is very important because at the end of the day, the money goes and goes into, suppose it, if FCRA related, suppose there is a, there is major violation that for which an offense has been committed, and there is an action. Will you like to spend, give money? If it's FC money, you may not want to. You may not want to give money even when the organization's registration is under renewal, because you really do not know whether it will be accepted or not accepted, and your money is not safe. So what I am trying to say is that these are areas which they will look at, for which we must have all documents in order. I will try to say whether the EPF challans, ECR, I would like to see that for the last 3 months, whether the TDS returns for the last 2 quarters, the TDS challan for the last 1 month, your professional tax deposit, your funding of gratuity, if you are within the Payment of Gratuity Act, all those things I will keep asking. I will keep noticing them also in the various documents. So the financial statement that I will get as the audited financial statement will give me a clear indication whether gratuity provision has been made for this organization, which it is required to do. So many things is something which we will have as, you know, proxy from various documents that we would see and keep it in our mind as to whether this is being done or not. You might not understand it, but that needs to be understood so that you are able to answer the question rightly. Now, next point is relating to MIS, and this is something that that donors look at. What is the level of automation in your organization? Automation, as I said, is not always, doesn't have a lot of cost. Again, it is a matter of your wanting to automate. Okay. So in accounting, in TDS, for assets, you can have standard softwares. You can have standard or customized software for HR. That's for payroll, for your leave, for your travel. Okay. For audit, you can have for your program MIS, you can have for your program, for grant management, you can have. So you can have the program MIS and the finance MIS on an integrated platform. That is also possible. A lot of so-called softwares are available which are standard, but which can be customized to your requirement with some amount of cost. But a lot of these automation is possible through stand-alone softwares which are now available. Please look into the market, look out of your organization, reduce the amount of manpower that is required for your work. It will bring wonders to your organization. So when it is automation, donors feel happy because they think that the human intervention is getting reduced and the chances of errors are going to come down. However, you have to be very mindful of the capability of your staff to be able to handle the automation. I'm only saying, definitely they'll ask about what is it that you have automated or the use of technology, and that is available. I can tell you a lot of things people are doing on Google Form, doesn't matter. Okay, Google Sheets, it's available everywhere and it's available for free. Okay, that's the first step that we have taken to ensure that authorization metrics, decisions relating to everybody being able to see the same document and authorize at different points of time and through a matrix is something that is possible. Again, we are doing one step towards ensuring proper internal controls. Now, mandatory accounting records is something that's the last point that I want to mention, is because of the fact that now accounting records have to be mandatorily kept by not-for-profit organization from August 2022. Now, there are two things that you need to understand. One is books of accounts. So what are the books of accounts that have to be maintained? Cash book, your ledger, your journal, and the copies of all the, receipts, copies of invoices, etc. This is something which is mandatory. The tax department by may disallow your application or your 85% application or your claim that this amount of income as application is not subject to taxation or is exempt from tax under section 11. However, now that is based not on your saying, it is based on your demonstrating or showing to the department that these records is something that you're keeping. Other documents, records of all the projects. If you are an educational medical institution, then all the institutions run by the organization. record of income of the organization during the previous year. Now, there are A, B, C, D, E requirements in this particular point, which I'm not reading out or now I've not captured, but you can see the rule 17 AA, and I've shared it earlier. What I want to say is that the income, from where it came, who gave the income, details of that donor, all that is something that you need to now maintain. Similar to income, the application or expenditure, what is the record of application out of the income? What is the record of application out of the income of the previous years? So you have the deemed application and the accumulation facility. अगर आप 85% नहीं spend कर सकते, which I think most of you now know that if you do not spend 85%, it's not taxable. You have the provision of deemed application or accumulation, and you have to opt for it. It is not automatic, it is conditional. But what did you spend out of those accumulation in this current year? You have to report. All voluntary contribution which is in the nature of corpus, you'll have to have proper documentation. So voluntary contribution जो आपको मिल रहा है by way of normal grants is what you will normally have in point B. But when it comes to specific corpus where the donor has specified that this is to be treated as corpus, that detailing also you have to keep. Record of contribution received. Acha, this leave it because this is meant for religion, for temples. Record of loans and borrowings अगर आपको लेना पड़ रहा है, just in case you were not able to fund your expenditure because the grants didn't come in. Record of properties held by the trust, both movable and immovable. That is something that is required now. So you can't say I don't have a fixed asset register. You have to have a fixed asset register because that is the record of properties held by the assessee and the record of fixed foreign contribution assets separately, separate balance sheet and separate reporting in your annual return in FC4. Record of specified persons, again as I mentioned when we were talking of governance, उनका record अलग से maintain करने को बोला है because department and the government wants to see whether that arm's length relationship is there between people who are in managerial or decision making positions versus the organization. Any other documents? Now, what are the three other provisions? When I'm saying form, the government has given you full freedom. It can be in written, printed form, electronic form, digital form, electromagnetic form, whatever form, and it can be even in data storage device, electromagnetic data storage device. Okay, so people are saying cloud computing and cloud storage, again something that is possible. Place, please remember that your accounting records have to be at the registered office. Now, most donors would not know this, but the accounting records have to be maintained at the registered office is the dictate. And if you are maintaining, if you have the HO versus the field accounting, and if you are maintaining accounting records in field, then you will have to inform this to the assessing officer with a board resolution within a certain period of time that you are also maintaining accounting records other than at the registered office. The period of retention of records is 10 years. Now, this is now mandated. So accounting records, books of, the other books that I have, other documents that I mentioned, 10 years. So the contract with the donors might say whatever, but the accounting records, the books of accounts and the other records mandated under Rule 17 AA has to be for a period of 10 years. Okay. Now, donors may stipulate record retention requirements, but this will override whatever is the requirement. Okay. Now, coming to the tips that I have in the next 15 minutes, understand the background, focus area, and causes funded by the donor. Okay, a potential donor. This is something that we had seen when we were talking of donor management. Okay, I did not repeat it, but this is very important because without understanding the donor, your positioning of your organization to the donor, that you will not be able to do. Now, just as donors look at you, please also look at the the credentials of the donor. Are they in the prior review category as far as FCRA is concerned? Are they in the business of sin goods? Okay, is something that you will have to also look at. So while it's good to chase money, it's also good to see the donors also in terms of donors themselves. Develop an understanding of the regulatory framework applicable to donors. I'm saying donors co, what are the donors, required to comply with? So for instance, when we talk of CSR, the donors have to comply with a lot of provisions under the Section 135 as well as the company's CSR policy rules 2013 as amended majorly in 2021. Now, हम अपनी story हर वक्त नहीं कह सकते as a not for profit. We need to understand what is it that is mentioned also as boundaries for the donors. Say, for instance, if it's a CSR corporate, the corporate cannot give you a project which is 1 plus 3 years, which is a total of 4 years, including the year in which it was sanctioned. Okay. Now you go to the donor because you have no understanding of what the corporate law, CSR laws is, and that is what we keep on explaining to you. And you always will go with a project for 5 years. Now, please remember that there is a boundary for the donor. So understand the regulatory framework for the donors also. And this is important when we are looking at donors, understand the donor and the donor milieu, the donor regulatory framework is also equally important before you are able to push out your side of the story. Okay. Ensure compliances. This is the biggest tip that I would want to say. Now, I have again mentioned this may be done in a phased manner, but please have a plan. Okay. Continuous education of organizations on various aspects of statute, especially given the fact that there is so much change happening. मैं ये देख रहा था कि FCRA के अंदर since October 2024 से लेके अभी 1st January 2025, the department has come with at least 4 to 5 press releases and official gazette notifications. So this kind of churning that is happening in this sector, somehow or the other, the government has caught fancy for this sector. And mind you, the fancy is for compliance and for understanding the need in terms of compliance. The changes in terms of compliance is what I can say. Risk management framework should be in place is something that I would want you to have, because if you have a risk management framework, you will have a policy, you will have risk registers. Doesn't cost, it only brings the aspect of risk on in the forefront, and it helps your people to address risk. Beware of negative news. Bigger organizations very mindful of their reputational risk. Okay, so when there's a reference check by the donor, when the donor moves out into the marketplace, the market due diligence as I called it, नेगेटिविटी नहीं होनी चाहिए अबाउट नेगेटिव publicity नहीं होनी चाहिए. Be proactive and manage adverse proceedings. So as I said, when we were talking of statutory proceedings, use technology as much as possible. A lot of them are free today. uh, Now social media is always available. While there is a cuts both ways, but it's low cost, you know, high pitch, high impact, high reach. So you can show a lot of your competitive edge through use of social media, which does not cost handsomely. If you were to use print media or to do a lot of publication or things like that, it will be much costlier. Now you have to find out what are the innovative ways in which you can talk about your organization and get that competitive edge. Be progressive, innovative, and forward looking. आजकल organization donors look at these qualities in organizations. I cannot define each of them. You know best in your sector, in your sphere, what is forward looking, what is innovative, what is progressive, not only in terms of programming, but in terms of your own institution. Ensure internal control. Okay. Specifically key policies. I have already told you that some of the statutory policies are not the finance and HR policies, but policies relating to POSH, okay, policies relating to the other policies that I just mentioned to you about apprentices. All those you have my presentations. Please go through that and see what are those policies that are statutorily required as per law. Those policies at least we must have. Okay. Chief functionary and key staff should have clear अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑन विजन मिशन, ये सब तो मैंने आपको पहले ही बता दिया है. बी prepared upfront. Now this is what is the preparation part. You have had some amount of donor due diligence and donor checklist. I will share more of them, but use the donor due diligence checklist to create a folder and update that folder with all the documents and details. It may not be in print form because a lot of these documents are not required in print form. They might be all in digital form, but they should be the latest updated. So you must have a folder or a place or a device where you have all these updated. Why? Because you will then not scramble for information during donor due diligence. Okay, use the checklist that you have got. So you may have got donors that might have come and done a donor due diligence, and you might have had 5 different donors come with checklist. उस चेकलिस्ट में से जेनेरिक चेकलिस्ट आप डिराइव करिए और जेनेरिक चेकलिस्ट के बेसिस पे अपना डिवाइस में अलग अलग सेक्शंस में फोल्डर्स को बना के रखिए एंड पीरियोडिकली अपडेट देम. So whenever a donor will come to you, you will not even have to, scramble here and there and say this is properly out of date. Whenever there is a change, whenever an income tax assessment has happened, whenever an income tax return has been filed, whenever annual return has been filed, the latest TDS quarterly return has been filed, that can be updated. The earlier ones you can keep removing or pruning. So what it does is it helps you have all these informations in digital form and readily available for the donor. Uh, I want to caution you to reduce undue reliance on auditors or reference to auditors by as far as donors are concerned. So it adversely affects your chance to qualify. So do not tell the donor, you please talk to our auditors. Do not tell the donor every time I will talk to my auditor and come back to you. These are negative points. Okay. The donor's role in due diligence in conveying a message is very crucial. Suppose if donors were to even talk and say, we will like to just have an audience with your auditor, it should not be for any specific information. That information is your duty to get from the auditor and not get it when the donor due diligence is happening. Get it before the donor due diligence. Even if there is an audience required by the donor, then please brief the auditor, because sometimes we have got a lot of leads from the auditors about the organization which might not be possible to get from the documents, but then it becomes a negative for not for the organizations. So you must have that understanding of not only trust but a good constructive relationship with the auditor, but do not allow the donors to get to big to nitpick and talk about specific things with the auditors. Just to have a overview of this organization from the audit and assurance point of view is something that should be the maximum interaction of donors with auditors. Otherwise, auditors don't understand what the donor is actually looking, and the donor is very smart. They will ask 20 questions and will get the entire story, the pulse. Very important for you. Be careful in terms of your working style. So, working style, when I mean, is the communication part. Uh, while donors need you, you need the donors. So, handle them. Have your staff know what care to have, what skill needs to be there uh, among your key staff who are handling the donor due diligence. मैं इसको explain नहीं कर सकता, but I only want to tell you the kind of interface that a donor and the organization staff should have, which is very cohesive, which is very amicable, which gives a certain amount of honesty and comfort to the donor, is the kind of working style that that person should demonstrate, or the number of persons who are engaged should demonstrate, including the chief functionary. Okay. Now, there are two things that we want to mention. New business development team. Again, I'm not saying this is something that has to be done overnight, but try as your organization grow to have a, a team or one or two people who focus on new business development. Why? Because grant, donations, corpus is our bread and butter. वो होगा जब भी पीछे प्रोग्राम होगा. So I'm not saying you devote too much of time. You can also look at, some people who might be working. I'm not recommending anything. People in your area who might be working to help on this new business development, you might want to do that. As you grow, you might want to have a small team of yours, because the new business development team will be the best team, small, very small team, a very core team, which will not only understand the donor landscape, but it will also be able to understand the positioning and requirement of donors, which generally एक फाइनेंस के लड़के को आप लगा दोगे वो नहीं समझ पाएगा. So with this, I come to the end of this presentation. So the key takeaway from today's session, please don't take this as a theoretical session. This session and the PPT that I will share with you is your ready reckoner for action. That is what, if that proves to be done by organization, this is the success of this particular session. All right. Uh, and I cannot emphasize that any more than this. Each point that I have mentioned is coming out of my experience. Nowhere it is mentioned. You can surf on the net, you can do any kind of analysis. The reality of what donor due diligence and grant is what is getting captured in these presentations. So I will stop in this. We have tried to see the areas of internal controls which demonstrate and give confidence to the donor in terms of what donors want, and as we had seen in the first session. So that will close part A of our presentation. So Biren is asking, as a donor, can we open a separate bank account? You can have a separate bank account for your grant. There's no minimum cap. That account can be only for your grant. It can be made zero balance at the end of the grant period, and it can be used by any other donor as well. Pritam has asked a question about UPI transactions. Now, uh, whatever is the method, I don't know whether trusts and societies will be given, will be able to do that. But if it is UPI transaction by staff, then the staff can be given money instead of having to do transaction through cash. However, if there is a method, the best method is net banking. And if that is possible, that would be the best way, because a lot of people have bank accounts today. So if you can regularize net banking and you are able to get bank details, that's probably the best way that I would suggest. Otherwise, any which ways that the wallets and the other mechanisms can be used by trust or by people who are there in the organization, and they can be settled through bank transaction, is something that you will have to work out. Being a Section 8 company, can we create corpus? Is there any time period to spend amount? You Section 8 company, you will have share capital. Okay. And you can also build capital by getting corpus from, maybe even getting corpus from your parent organization, or corpus from a parent organization will not qualify as CSR, but you can get corpus. Or you can get corpus from other organizations or other foundations that might want to give corpus. That's not a problem. But as far as foreign contribution corpus is concerned, the FCRA department is not encouraging corpus. They are wanting to liquidate corpus. But that is something that is because the FC money is program or utilization based. Therefore, they are not encouraging. They are asking organizations to deplete their FC corpus. However, corpus is recognized in the income tax law as something that can be taken and that can be used subject to provisions relating to modes of investment and provisions relating to you know withdrawal or utilization of corpus and replenishment of corpus, those provisions have to be done. Other than that, there is no provisions, no restrictions. How long can you take? There is no period specified in law. Now, how to allocate common cost account interest to various donors if organization has one account? There is an Excel sheet that we share with organizations. Asha, you can ask me separately. We will share it. It's a very simple sheet for reporting interest in a common pool account for different donors. Shampoo Singh is asking a question. I'm Shampoo. Yeah, my question is, who can be member or in a purchase committee? This is a question which is more specific to the purchase policy. So in a purchase committee, generally you must have people who are from admin, people from who are people who are the requisitioners, and maybe one person as the head of the department. And the purchase committee may not be a standard committee; it can change from time to time and goods to goods, whatever. As we are doing programs in rural areas, how can we manage local purchase? Yes, that's a question, but I can tell you local purchases is possible provided you have a procedure and that procedure is part of your procurement policy. You can get, you can have a committee which is the purchase committee. Your admin person or the accounts and admin person can go and get the quotations, put it up to the purchase committee and take a call. Documents required for resource person appointment for a particular program. Uh, Again, Shampoo, I can only say that if you are engaging a resource person as a community resource person, then you might want to engage that person on an honorarium, which can be through a contract. That is possible right now, may not be possible after the labor. That's how you might have to do it and look at the TDS provisions under 194C. Uh, Being a Section 8 company, can we create corpus? ये तो क्वेश्चन मैंने आंसर कर दिया बीरेन का. बीरेन, जो कॉर्पस है उसके ऊपर कोई रेस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है. कॉर्पस is explicitly recognized in income tax law as something that can be mobilized. It's not considered as income. It's considered as capital. That is also settled. Okay. So it's not income. It's to be shown in the capital side of your balance sheet. It's recognized in income tax law in section 11(1)(d). The 11(1)(d) doesn't specify the period for corpus, but it specifies that the corpus will be treated as a corpus if the donor has specifically in its donation letter said that it has to be used for corpus. Now, I those are questions that we have done. So, Abu Tala has a hands raised. If he can ask, and then others can go.
Yes. Hi, sir. This is Sindhu from Subduction. So I just wanted to know, like few donors will not give us a direct amount, like talking about the individual donors. Instead, they'll give us some kind donations, like getting some groceries or some like some materials, basically. So they do ask for the acknowledgement receipt from our end. So, is there any particular, just like an ADG for finance, is there any particular receipts or document we could maintain for this kind of donation except writing in a register?
So what you can do is have a register where you have got kinds of supply. Okay. Now that is one way, and you will have to, use that kind supply for your programs if the kind supply is something that is inventory for purposes of program. So that is something that you can do in your register, which takes the inward and also then the issue part of it is something that you can do. Now, if you see in 10BD form, there is something which is mentioned as donation in kind. Okay. And so you might want to report donation in kind by ascribing a value which is closest to the market value of that kind supply. These are the two requirements that are there as far as kind supplies are concerned, as long as they are not in the nature of assets. If they are in the nature of assets, you might have to recognize them in your fixed asset, in your books as fixed assets. If they are recognized, because you will not recognize non-fixed asset as in your books of accounts. They will be recognized as kind supply, and that's about it, because they do not have value. But if you have fixed asset, then you might have to recognize that in your fixed asset register, because not only it has value, but it has value for more than 1 year.
Okay, so if we, if we upload that in 10BB as a kind donation part, so will that also be considered for that donor as a tax exemption?
No, the kind supply is for you to report in 10BD. Anything which is given in kind does not have an 80G entitlement.
Got it, sir.
रत्नाकर रतिकांता
सर मेरा 4 क्वेश्चन से ज्यादा है।
अच्छा बोलो।
एक चीज है कि सर नो कॉस्ट एक्सटेंशन, जैसे कि मान लीजिए मेरा एक प्रोजेक्ट
हाँ बोलिए बोलिए, आगे बताते जाओ। हाँ फिर क्या क्वेश्चन है?
31 मार्च को ही मेरा कंप्लीट हो रहा है प्रोजेक्ट, बट
हाँ
समहाउ उस एक मैंने कुछ नो कॉस्ट कुछ ऐसे डिलीवरेबल है जो कि मेरा बैकलॉग चल रहा है, जो कि मान लीजिए नेक्स्ट फाइनेंशियल ईयर में कर रहा हूँ और उसका अगेंस्ट मैं एक्सपेंडिचर बुक कर रहा हूँ, बट उसमें मेरा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लेटर जो है वो ऑलरेडी खत्म हो चुका है। क्या मैं
सो नो
जो
नो कॉस्ट एक्सटेंशन का मतलब रतिकांता यही होता है कि आप डोनर के पास जाएंगे और कहेंगे एक्स्ट्रा कॉस्ट मुझे नहीं चाहिए, लेकिन मेरा पीरियड एक्सटेंड कर दो। अगर वो पीरियड एक्सटेंड करता है और नो कॉस्ट एक्सटेंशन की अप्रूवल कर देता है, दैट इज गुड इनफ फॉर यू टू बी एबल टू डिलीवर जो भी अनडिलीवरेबल, जो भी नॉन डिलीवरेबल थे, उसको नेक्स्ट ईयर में डिलीवर कर दो और उस पैसे को खर्च करके और उसकी रिपोर्टिंग कर दो।
बट सर
अकॉर्डिंगली
जब
आप
अगर
अपने बुक्स में रिपोर्ट
कोई
करें।
कम्युनिकेशन नहीं हो पा रहा है, मगर उस कुछ लिखित में नहीं दे रहे हैं कि डोनर से नहीं मिल रहा है, तो मेरा क्या एग्जाम्पशन वो अलाउबल होगा या ये टैक्सेबल में
No,
जाएगा?
no, no. So if you make an application out of the money in the next year which is available, तो आपको जो 9A 10 का रिक्वायरमेंट है, 85% का रिक्वायरमेंट है, वो एक तरफ है, वो आपको रिक्वायरमेंट कंप्लाई करना है। ठीक है, समझ रहे हो क्या कह रहा हूँ? एक
ये
तो
सर
85% का खर्चे का एप्लीकेशन का रिक्वायरमेंट है।
ये
दूसरा,
सर
अगर वो कंप्लायंस आप कर रहे हो और ये डोनर का स्पेसिफिक वो कंप्लायंस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की, ये डोनर की कंप्लायंस के अंदर what you will have to see is that you have a no cost extension. If you do not have a no cost extension, then in that case please write and say please give me a no cost extension, because in any case I will be, मैं इसको अगले साल काम करूंगा, उसको अगले साल काम करिए। और अगर वो 9A 10 का पार्ट नहीं है या पार्ट है, तो उसको अकॉर्डिंगली यूटिलाइज करके अगले साल आप रिपोर्ट कर दीजिए कि ये हमने आपसे एक्स्ट्रा कॉस्ट नहीं लिया है, लेकिन बिकॉज इट कुड नॉट बी डिलीवर्ड इन दिस पर्टिकुलर फाइनेंशियल ईयर, देयरफॉर वी हैव यूटिलाइज्ड इट इन द नेक्स्ट ईयर, और उसकी रिपोर्ट अकॉर्डिंगली दे देंगे।
ओके ओके ओके।
नेक्स्ट।
सर और एक चीज सीएसआर का एंड से सर, हम लोग का बोल रहे हैं कि सीएसआर का जितना भी कोई भी इनकम जनरेट हो रहा है, मान लीजिए इंटरेस्ट हो गया, उसमें
हाँ हाँ।
जो भी आपका सरप्लस जनरेट हो रहा है, अब सीएसआर इनकम उसको बोला जाएगा। मान लीजिए इंटरेस्ट पार्ट जो जो भी है, और सर जैसे कि कंट्रीब्यूशन कुछ हम लोग रिसीव कर रहे हैं फील्ड से, सीएसआर जो प्रोजेक्ट चल रहा है उसको क्या हम लोग सीएसआर इनकम बोलेंगे, जो कंट्रीब्यूशन कलेक्शन हो रहा है कुछ कुछ एक्टिविटी के ऊपर?
देखो ऐसा है, जो सीएसआर का फंड आपको मिला उसके ऊपर अगर इंटरेस्ट हो रहा है, तो आप अपने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में देखिए वो इंटरेस्ट उस सीएसआर की जो ग्रांट आपको मिली है उसका पार्ट है, तो उतना ही पैसा अगर सीएसआर का कम दिया जाएगा तो वो पैसा उस ग्रांट के अगेंस्ट में एडजस्ट होगा। अगर उसके बारे में कुछ भी नहीं कहता है डोनर और कहता है कि इंटरेस्ट आप अपने हिसाब से यूज करिए, तो उसको आप अदर इनकम के अंदर रिपोर्ट करेंगे, इंटरेस्ट इनकम में रिपोर्ट करेंगे, जो कमर्शियल सेंस के अंदर आप रिपोर्ट करते हैं, और उसको अपने ऑब्जेक्टिव्स के ऊपर खर्च करेंगे डिपेंडिंग अपॉन योर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट। दैट इज वन थिंग। Okay,
यस सर।
as far as income generation through CSR activities are concerned, again it will have to be derived out of the CSR contract, number one. Number two, that will be other income, जिसका कि again the donor might have, CSR donor might say कि इसको आप इस प्रोजेक्ट में ही लगाएंगे, बट ये ध्यान कर लीजिएगा कि जो इनकम आप जनरेट कर रहे हैं वो आपके प्रोजेक्ट जो है, जिस ऑब्जेक्ट के लिए भी वो प्रोजेक्ट है, वो आपका ऑब्जेक्ट होना चाहिए आपके चैरिटेबल इंस्टीट्यूशन का, एंड टू दैट एक्सटेंट इट इज इनसिडेंटल बिजनेस इनकम। नाउ इट इज नॉट अ कमर्शियल रिसीट विच इज नॉट इंसिडेंटल बिजनेस, माने वो प्योर बिजनेस नहीं होना चाहिए था, वो इंसिडेंटल टू अचीवमेंट ऑफ द ऑब्जेक्टिव, जो हमारा कमर्शियल सेंस कमर्शियल रिसीट्स चैरिटेबल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन हो सकती है, उस टेस्ट को फुलफिल करते हुए अगर अदर इनकम आप जनरेट कर रहे हैं, देन अदर इनकम either it will be other income for purposes of, we are talking of local income, not for FC income. So agar CSR income is local income, then you can have it as other income. If there are no strings attached to that in the CSR contract, then it can be used for your objective. If there are specific contractual obligation in the contract जो CSR का है, उसके हिसाब से आपको करना पड़ेगा।
ये सर मैं इस सिचुएशन को समझ रहा हूँ, आप जो बोले एकदम सही मान रहा हूँ। इसमें एक चैलेंज सर क्या आ रहा है, मान लीजिए सीएसआर का जो प्रोजेक्ट चल रहा है मेरा, उसमें एक एपीओ एस्टेब्लिश किया जा रहा है, एपीओ फॉर्म हुआ है। एपीओ जो है मेरा प्रॉफिट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, और एपीओ का जो इनकम जनरेट हो रहा है
वो तो एफपीओ
उसको
का है,
क्या।
आपका थोड़ी है।
हाँ बट सर वो सीएसआर फंड से ही तो एपीओ फॉर्म हुआ है
आपने
सर।
सीएसआर फंड, एक मिनट, आपने सीएसआर फंड लिया, एफपीओ क्रिएट किया, तो एफपीओ की क्रिएशन के अंदर आपने क्या उसकी कॉर्पस में दिया, या आपने उसको क्या, सीएसआर ने आपको उस एफपीओ फॉर्मेशन के लिए किस हेड में या किस एक्टिविटी के लिए पैसा दिया था?
सर उसका जो स्टार्टिंग में जो कैपिटल आइटम रख रहा है, इवन उसमें जो इनपुट
फॉर्मेशन, ठीक है।
सपोर्ट, इनपुट इनपुट सपोर्ट पूरा दे रहे हैं हम लोग पूरा।
ठीक है, आपने इनपुट सपोर्ट सारा दे दिया, और इनपुट सपोर्ट देने के बाद में आपने उसकी रिपोर्टिंग कर दी सीएसआर को।
यस सर।
नाउ दैट एफपीओ इज अ डिफरेंट एंटिटी फ्रॉम योर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, ठीक है, ओके।
ओके।
Now you have nothing to do with the FPO ka income generation, because that is a income of the entity. You, what have you to do with? You are in IGS.
यस।
What is your organization? IGS.
आईजीएस सर, आईजीएस।
IGS को उस एफपीओ को फॉर्मेशन करने के अंदर जो सपोर्ट करना था उसको सपोर्ट कर दिया, और उसके खर्चे को सीएसआर को दे दिया, चैप्टर ओवर। अब
ओके।
आईजीएस ने एफपीओ प्रमोट किया, एफपीओ एक सेपरेट एंटिटी है, उस एंटिटी का आईजीएस से कोई लेना देना नहीं है। यू माइट हैव पीपल ऑन द बोर्ड, वट एवर, दैट इज ऑल राइट, बट that FPO XYZ has its own art, is an artificial person, has its own entity, has all the powers that you have as IGS. So you have nothing to do with the income of the FPO. That is the FPO's income.
ओके सर, ओके सर, थैंक यू सर, थैंक्स।
Sharad sir, hi, Iti this side.
If you go ahead.
Yes, suppose I am a 501(c)(3) entity
हाँ
and I am subgranting to Indian NGOs in the
हाँ
NGOs in the Indian,
हाँ, go ahead.
periphery. So should I be worried कि NGOs Rule 5 follow कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं FCRA का, like 20% of the administration cost? Because as a 501(c)(3, मुझे तो utilization certificate में issue नहीं होगा 20% वाला जो रूल है, बट ओवरऑल अगर एनजीओ ने नहीं फॉलो किया तो दे कैन बी इन द रिस्क ऑफ कंप्लायंस, तो शुड
So
आई बी
इति मेरा
वरीड?
इति 1 minute मेरा,
हाँ
यू आर अ 501(c)(3), ओके, ठीक है, आपने फंड दे दिया, डोनेशन दे दिया, ठीक है, सिंस यू आर अ चैरिटेबल इंस्टीट्यूशन इन द यूएस, देयरफॉर यू हैव गिवन इट based
सॉरी
through the FCA. ET, you are, can you hear me?
आई मिस, यस यस नाउ आई कैन.
So what I'm saying is that you are a not-for-profit entity recognized in the US laws. Okay, you have given money to a not-for-profit registered entity under FCRA through the FCRA route, checking that they have all the registration in order. Okay, now what happens is that the FC4 के अंदर जो भी violations हैं, which is the 20% violation on admin cost, is the violation of the not for profit registered FCRA entity. ठीक है? So what is the risk to you as a 5013C entity? The risk to you is that if they are creating these offenses and there is a penalty or there is a possibility of cancellation, you will have a problem in terms of money. But there is no direct relationship between the provisions in the FCRA versus your status as a 501. That is what I want to say. Have you understood what I'm trying to say? There is a risk to your money if the compliance is not there. But it is good, therefore, to say, see whether they have filed the AR, the FC4 in time. What is the content in the FC4 specifically in terms of point number 8, serial number 8 of FC4, which has these 15 declarations? Are they faltering in on any of those declarations? That's the red flag. And then you take a call whether you would want to fund it in future or not. But to
Sure.
you, as a 501(c) entity, it does C3 entity, it doesn't really have any implications. Am I
Okay, sure.
clear?
Yeah, thank you.
I
Yes.
am only saying that please see that the compliance for you means that your money, your donation through the FCRA channel is not in jeopardy or jeopardized because an action is taken by the MHA on this FCRA registered entity for violation. So you have to be mindful of offenses or violations and take a call, but you are directly not responsible for these 15 self-declaration defaults that might happen. But you can become careful in terms of giving money in future to this organization or not.
Okay. Thank you.
Somebody has said, how can we mobilize corpus? I have no answer to this. I am not into fund mobilization. Corpus is something that is also gives a lot of comfort to organizations. You have to see, uh, corpus will not come like this. Corpus comes after the donor has become familiar with you through one or two donation rounds and then thinks that, well, this organization is good. Not only should we give them regular money, but we should also support their, what is corpus? Corpus is basically for the rainy day, for their objectives, for anything that they want to do. So no strings attached to the money. ग्रांट डोनेशन में तो हर पैसे का हिसाब देना है. Corpus is, that's the reason why we want to take corpus, so that we have that flexibility. That will not come just by going to a donor and saying I want corpus. Corpus will come through productive association for a couple of years, is when you can talk to donors. A lot of uh, please do not take corpus, FC corpus, because that is becoming a difficult situation. But local corpus, local donate, I mean, INR corpus is something that is acceptable uh, as of today in law. I don't know what happens in future, because the FCRA law and the income tax law, those people are working together. So whatever is good practice in income tax, they are taking to FCRA. Whatever is good practice in FCRA, they are taking to income tax. So you never know what happens. Okay. But today, definitely the way to get corpus is to have a constructive relationship with a donor who has money for corpus, and then bargain for a corpus. Nobody will give you corpus directly, is my quick answer to that. I think we are out of time, and thank you very much. Have a great weekend.